Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take the sources you're looking into and, well, pull out the key insights for you. Saves you time, keeps you in the loop.
Exactly.
And today, we're really digging into something fascinating. The deep connection between language and knowledge. We're working from those PDS you shared perspectives and the further examples one.
That's right. And we've got about 6 core questions we want to tackle based on those.
Yes, 6 big ones. Like, first off, is language actually necessary to pass knowledge down, especially the complex stuff? Then what might we lose if, say, everyone suddenly spoke the same language? Is there a downside to uniformity?
A really interesting question.
And following that, if a language dies out, does the knowledge it held just vanish with it?
The link there seems pretty strong, as we'll see.
Okay, then number 4. How do our own values, our assumptions, kind of sneak into the language we use?
Yeah, how language isn't neutral.
5th, this one's intriguing, is ambiguity in language always bad? Or could it maybe actually help create knowledge?
Could it be productive? Yeah.
And finally, we all seem to have some basic language ability, right? But can we ever create knowledge that's totally free from, power dynamics?
A tough one. So yeah, lots to unpack.
Definitely. Get ready, because there are some surprising links and honestly some really thought-provoking stuff in here.
Let's jump into that first question then. How much does passing knowledge along person to person, generation to generation, how much does that really hinge on language?
The sources seem pretty clear.
Yeah.
It's foundational.
It really is. I mean, sure, you can watch someone tie a knot and learn it, but how do you transmit, say, intricate cultural wisdom over centuries? Observation alone doesn't quite cut it.
Exactly. And that Polynesian wayfinders example using the hukulia canoe, that's just incredible. Memorized chants, but they weren't just songs.
No, not at all.
They were packed with data, star coordinates, wind shifts, reef locations, stuff absolutely vital for those long voyages. It's hard to imagine conveying that complexity reliably without, well, language.
That's a perfect example. And it's not just ancient history, right?
Yeah.
Think about today. You see deaf parents on TikTok using ASL with their toddler.
Yeah, I've seen those.
They're transmitting the language, yes, but also culture, identity, and doing it visually to millions, including hearing people. It shows how varied language forms, signed languages to, enable massive knowledge sharing.
And the tech world gives us another angle. That GitHub Stable Diffusion Web UI.
Oh, yeah, the code example.
42,000 people collaborating from all over the world. They might not even share a spoken language, but they're building this complex thing together using code.
Which is itself a language, a symbolic system.
Right. It really drives home that programming languages are powerful tools for creating knowledge together.
So what we're seeing across these examples, chants, sign language, code, is that while you can mimic simple skills, the moment knowledge gets complex, abstract, or needs to build up over time,
You need symbols. You need language.
you generally need that symbolic framework to pass it on reliably.
That reliability point is huge. And the sources bring up aviation safety, talk about high stakes. Apparently, deviations from the standard ICAO phraseology,
Yeah.
the specific words pilots and controllers have to use.
Like line up and wait.
Exactly. Those deviations were a factor in 20% of serious runway incidents in 2023. Just wow.
And IATA found that sticking to the script cuts hearing errors in half.
Cuts them in half. That's such a direct link between precise language and safety. You can't get much clearer than that.
It really underscores needing shared, precise language when clarity is non-negotiable.
Right.
And think about the reach again with that ASL couple on TikTok.
And 9 million views.
Yeah, they've effectively created this huge crowdsourced space for learning baby sign language. Knowledge spreading on a massive scale visually.
And back to code for a sec, that GitHub Octoverse report from 2024 just reinforces it. Stable Diffusion Web UI, all those contributors iterating, improving.
Building on each other's work through code.
It just shows code as this global language for collaborative knowledge building. So, yeah, it seems clear. Language, in all its forms, is pretty fundamental for knowledge, especially the complicated stuff.
Okay, so if language is that vital, let's move to the second question. What might get lost if everyone just spoke one single language?
This is where it gets really interesting, because the sources suggest linguistic diversity isn't just, colorful. It actually shapes how we see the world.
Right. It's not just different labels for the same things. A single global language could potentially flatten out all these different ways humans have carved up reality.
That Himba example from Namibia is so striking. They have lots of words for different greens.
But blue just gets lumped in with green.
Yeah. And it's not just words, it affects their perception. They're apparently faster at spotting subtle green differences, but struggle more than English speakers to pick out a blue tile among green ones.
It's like the language carves out their perceptual world differently.
Exactly. It's not just describing reality, it's shaping it. Losing languages could mean losing these unique ways of seeing, these cognitive frameworks built over ages.
Precisely. Or think about Yélî Dnye on Russell Island. No general word for tree.
You have to name the species every time.
Every single time. And the result, an incredible, deeply ingrained botanical knowledge among speakers. Imagine losing that pressure to be specific just because your language gets simpler.
So the efficiency of a universal language for, say, trade, it might come at the cost of these really nuanced understandings, especially of the natural world, like shrinking our collective mental toolkit.
That's a good way to put it, a diminished cognitive toolkit. And consider Inuktitut, all those words for snow and ice.
I remember reading about that.
A 2025 study found 57 distinct roots, including one, Kikalukpak, for that specific sound, crunchy snow that squeaks underfoot.
Wow.
These aren't just poetic descriptions, they're vital for survival, for safe travel. How do you cram that specific critical meaning into one word like snow?
You can't. You inevitably lose information, important information.
The language itself becomes a kind of repository for that deep environmental knowledge.
And the Japanese sake brewing example fits here too, right? UNESCO listed it.
In 2024, yeah. And terms like moto, the yeast starter, they encode this really complex practical knowledge about temperature, timing.
Stuff that modern chemistry hasn't even fully replicated or automated.
Exactly. The language holds know-how that science is still in some ways trying to unpack.
So linguistic uniformity wouldn't just be less interesting. It could actually mean losing real, specialized, context-heavy knowledge.
Which leads us directly into the third big question. If language carries this vital knowledge, what happens when a language actually dies? Does the knowledge just disappear with it?
The evidence in the sources points towards, well, yeah, largely it does. It's pretty sobering.
Very sobering. That 2021 PNAS study is stark in places like the Amazon, New Guinea, North America.
Up to 91% of medicinal plant uses are documented in only one language.
That's right. A huge percentage. If that language goes extinct, we're potentially losing pharmacological knowledge forever, knowledge that could benefit everyone.
That's a massive potential loss. And it's not just about physical things like medicine, right?
No, absolutely not. Take Ayapazoque, or Ayapaneco in Mexico. Fewer than 15 elderly speakers left.
15.
Linguists are rushing to document things like their ritual speech. These aren't just everyday chats. They often hold a community's history, their cosmology, their unique ways of understanding the world. Once the speakers are gone.
That whole way of knowing could be lost, even if you write some things down.
Exactly. Dictionaries, video archives, they're valuable, no doubt. But the sources make a good point. They can't capture the living, breathing, interactive context of a speech community.
It's like reading a transcript of a great stand-up routine versus actually being there. You miss the timing, the energy, the shared understanding.
Perfect analogy. And look at the practical side with the Yurok tribe's study with the USGS. They have specific words for different heights of flames and cultural burns, Weipi versus Ontoi Weipui.
And that links to real results.
Directly. Better soil moisture, higher hazelnut yields. This is ecological knowledge embedded in the language that standard forestry didn't have. Lose the terms, and you might lose the effective practice.
Wow. So going back to the medicinal knowledge from that PNAS survey, it's not just knowing that a plant is used.
Right. It's the how, the dosage, the preparation, when to harvest it. Those crucial details are often tied up in the language.
And when the language vanishes, those details can evaporate. It's not just a cultural loss, it's a practical, knowledge-based loss with real-world implications.
Definitely. Which brings us quite nicely to question 4. How do our own values, our assumptions, actually influence the language we use?
Because it's becoming clear language isn't just this neutral tool, is it?
Not at all. It's tangled up with social hierarchies, with our underlying beliefs. The sources show this quite clearly.
That French Senate vote in 2023 is a prime example, banning gender-inclusive spellings like "isle" in official documents.
Arguing it hurts clarity.
Right. But in doing so, they're essentially writing a specific view of gender and authority into law. It's a linguistic choice with real social weight.
They're basically saying this is the proper way, and that implicitly pushes other ways of expressing gender to the margins. And we see something similar, maybe even scarier, with AI.
Large language models.
Yeah, that 2024 study finding they rate job applicants using African American Vernacular English, or AAVE, as less intelligent, less employable.
Just based on the dialect.
Just based on the language patterns they learned from the massive amounts of internet text they were trained on. It shows how societal biases get baked right into the algorithms.
That's really disturbing. The AI isn't intentionally biased, but it learns the biases present in our own language use online.
Precisely. And look at the Argentine military in 2024 extending their ban on gender-neutral endings, the E or NX, to all government documents.
Again, claiming it impairs clarity.
It shows how even stylistic choices, things that seem like just grammar rules, can be used to effectively delegitimize certain identities, like non-binary people.
It's about who gets acknowledged, whose language is seen as valid.
And that Allen AI audit adds another layer. Those advanced LLMs didn't just rate AAVE CVs lower.
They recommended harsher sentences,
Yeah.
too, for the same crime described in AAVE versus standard English.
Exactly. Suggesting the algorithmic bias might even amplify recorded human biases in some cases. It really highlights how our values, conscious or not, get embedded deep within our language tools, impacting fairness and equality.
So language clearly reflects and reinforces social structures, biases, power. Which leads to a really interesting question, number 5. Is ambiguity always a flaw? Could it sometimes be good for knowledge?
It seems counterintuitive, maybe. But the sources argue pretty convincingly that ambiguity can drive progress, especially in law.
Okay, how?
Take the Commerce Clause in the U.S. Constitution. Just 16 words and deliberately broad.
Right, its scope has been debated for centuries.
Exactly. That ambiguity has fueled endless legal debate, landmark Supreme Court cases from the Steamboat era, right up to debates about federal power today. It basically generated whole fields of constitutional scholarship.
It's like the vagueness forced people to keep defining and refining what it meant over time. That NFIB v. Sebelius case in 2012
The healthcare case, yeah.
was not buying insurance commerce. The court had to grapple with that ambiguity, and ultimately reinterpreting the mandate as a tax fundamentally shifted healthcare policy.
And the key insight here is that the semantic openness wasn't necessarily a bug. It forced judges and lawmakers to articulate more precise doctrines as they applied the vague clause to new situations. The ambiguity spurred deeper thinking.
It acted as a catalyst.
In a way, yes. And it's not just historical. Look at the EU's AI Act from 2024.
Defining high-risk AI.
Right. The definition isn't perfectly sealed. It's somewhat open-textured. It has checklists, but also exceptions. This means regulators, tech companies, civil rights groups have to keep talking, keep negotiating what falls under it.
So the ambiguity isn't a sign of sloppy drafting, necessarily. It's built-in flexibility.
It seems so. It allows the law to adapt to new AI developments nobody foresaw, while still providing a framework for accountability. It's a kind of productive ambiguity.
So ambiguity isn't always the enemy. Sometimes it's the space where innovation and deeper understanding happen. Fascinating.
Which brings us to our final question. We hear about universal grammar, this idea that humans might have some innate, shared linguistic foundation.
Like a biological blueprint for language.
Sort of, but given that, can we ever produce knowledge that's truly free from power dynamics? The sources suggest it's complicated.
While the basic capacity might be innate, the actual languages we learn and use with things like honorifics or ways to mark evidence or even racialized dialects, those arise in society.
And societies are shaped by power. Look at the Kayapo in Brazil. They call themselves Kabinme, those who speak beautifully.
They link good speaking directly to moral worth.
Exactly. Rhetorical skill is tied to social value. Language and power, right there.
And we saw it with the AI again. Training on internet text means the AI absorbs our existing prejudices.
It shows that even if you try to be neutral in producing knowledge, if your tools, in this case, the language data, are shaped by inequality, the output can still reproduce that inequality without conscious effort to counteract it.
So having an innate ability isn't enough for neutrality. We need to constantly critique and maybe redesign the linguistic tools themselves.
That seems to be the takeaway. The sources connect things that seem really different, like those ICAO aviation rules and the huge text data sets for AI.
What's the connection?
The underlying point is, whoever sets the rules, whoever curates the rulebook, whether it's standard phrases for pilots or the text fed to an AI they influence social outcomes, power is embedded in setting the norms.
Which means we constantly need to be auditing, diversifying our sources, actively redesigning what counts as neutral language, whether it's us humans using it or the machines we build.
You can't just set it and forget it, assuming objectivity. It requires ongoing work.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, what are the big takeaways?
Well, first, language is clearly essential for transmitting complex knowledge. But second, the sheer diversity of languages is also crucial. It preserves unique ways of seeing and specialized knowledge.
Right. And third, ambiguity isn't always a flaw. It can actually be a source of innovation and deeper understanding.
Definitely. And finally, language is never truly separate from power. Our values and biases are woven into it, which means we need constant vigilance.
So being more aware of different languages, being okay with some ambiguity, and critically looking at how power works through language, those seem vital for a healthy knowledge landscape.
Absolutely. It's about fostering a more robust and inclusive way of knowing together.
So here's maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. We have these incredibly powerful systems now built on language. Think open source code projects. Think AI that scale globally almost instantly.
Yeah, the scale is unprecedented. So how do we best manage what the sources call the maintenance chores? How do we actively preserve linguistic diversity, use ambiguity smartly, and stay alert to bias in these hyperscaled systems to ensure our shared knowledge stays resilient and fair for the future?
Something to really reflect on how your own use and understanding of language fits into that bigger picture.